The heat of the day hung thick over the desert, shimmering waves rising off the ground as Jesse Rollins rode his horse along the narrow trail toward the Apache settlement. He was no stranger to the land. Dust, rock, and sky were as familiar to him as the breath in his chest, but today felt different. The silence weighed heavier than usual, almost like the earth itself was holding its breath. His horse snorted uneasily, hooves crunching against the dry soil, ears flicking back and forth as if it too sensed what Jesse didn't yet know. Jesse hadn't meant to come here on his own. A trader, an old man named Samuel who passed through town every few weeks, had told him that an Apache woman had asked to see him specifically. Jesse had laughed at first, thinking Samuel's words were just a trick to get him to buy something he didn't need. But there was no trick in the man's face, no jest in his tired voice. Samuel had leaned across the saloon table, whispering like a man sharing a dangerous secret. "She said your name, Jesse. She said you must come." Now here he was, riding straight into a camp that had no reason to welcome him. Jesse tugged lightly at his reins, slowing his horse as the first signs of the settlement appeared, a cluster of lodges, smoke rising from fires, women grinding corn, children darting in and out of shadows. Every head turned his way. Suspicion gleamed in the men's eyes, sharp as drawn knives. Mothers pulled their little ones close, shielding them with instinctive mistrust. Jesse kept his hat low, his hand away from the pistol at his side. He wasn't here to fight. An older woman stepped forward, and the tension around him shifted. She wasn't tall, but her presence commanded respect. A dark blanket was draped over her shoulders despite the unrelenting sun, and her face bore the deep lines of age, of pain, of endurance. When she looked at Jesse, he felt as though she was weighing every choice he had ever made. "You are Rollins," she said, her English rough but steady. Jesse inclined his head, respectful. "Yes, ma'am, that's me. You were told to come." "Yes, ma'am, I was." She studied him for a long, unnerving silence before she nodded and turned, motioning for him to follow. Jesse dismounted, tying his horse to a post, his boots heavy on the dry earth as he trailed her deeper into the camp. The murmurs of the people followed him like whispers of ghosts. They walked past the main fires, past the lodges where life went on, men repairing tools, women tending to food, children laughing until their mothers hushed them at the sight of the stranger. Jesse's jaw tightened. He had lived long enough near the borderlands to know that peace here was fragile. He had been taught to fear these people once, but now, as he followed the woman's small frame, he felt something closer to dread, not of them, but of what waited for him. The woman stopped before a lodge near the sandstone ridge at the edge of camp. It was smaller, quieter, almost hidden from the rest. She placed her hand against the wooden frame, her voice low when she spoke again. "There is something you must know. A truth hidden too long." Jesse frowned, his chest tightening. "What truth?" Her dark eyes locked on his, and in them, Jesse saw both grief and accusation. "He doesn't know you exist." The words made no sense at first, dropping into his ears like stones into a well. "Who doesn't?" he asked, confusion roughening his voice. The flap of the lodge moved, and Jesse's question answered itself. A boy stepped into the dim light. He was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old, his hair black as night, his skin bronzed by the sun. He clutched a little wooden horse in his hand, its surface worn smooth by constant touch. Jesse took in the sight with the distant awareness of a man seeing something important but not yet understanding why. And then the boy looked up. His eyes, clear, bright, startlingly blue, caught Jesse like a fist to the chest. The kind of blue that didn't belong here, not in this land, not in this camp. Jesse staggered back half a step, his throat closing, his pulse hammering in his ears. Those eyes were his own. The woman's voice came again, firmer this time, like a verdict. "Your son." Jesse's world lurched. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He stared at the boy, at those familiar eyes set in a face both foreign and achingly familiar. Memories rushed him like a storm, nights long ago, stolen moments with a woman he had loved but could never claim. Her laughter, her softness, the fire of her spirit. The way their worlds had ripped them apart. He had buried it all, convinced himself she was gone forever. And yet here was proof that she had lived on after him, that she had carried something of him. A child, his child. Jesse's boots felt nailed to the earth. His mouth opened but no words came. He wanted to reach out, but his hands shook. He wanted to step closer, but fear held him still. The boy's gaze didn't waver, curious but cautious, innocent of the weight his existence carried. He had no idea. The woman's expression didn't soften. She had carried this secret, protected it, and now she was placing it before him with no mercy. Jesse swallowed hard, his throat burning. The boy shifted, gripping the wooden horse tighter, and Jesse's heart broke at the thought of all the years he had missed. The first steps, the first words, the chance to hold him when he was small. The boy had grown without him, had been taught, cared for, and loved by others while Jesse had lived ignorant of his very existence. The silence stretched until Jesse thought it might suffocate him. The weight of his past, his mistakes, his absence pressed down like the desert sun. His breath came shallow, his vision blurred at the edges. The boy stood in the doorway of the lodge, clutching that little wooden horse like it was the only anchor he had in a world of shifting shadows. Jesse couldn't look away. He saw everything in that child, the curve of his jaw that echoed Jesse's father, the stubborn set of his mouth, but most of all, those piercing blue eyes. They had followed Jesse his entire life in the mirror, in every reflection he had ever cast. Now they stared back at him from a face he had never before seen, and it felt like a blow so deep his chest might split open. The Apache woman, his son's grandmother, he realized, stood silent, her gaze unwavering. She didn't have to say more, her words already echoed in his head, "He doesn't know you exist." Jess's throat burned with questions. Why hadn't he been told? Why had she, her daughter, the woman Jesse once loved, kept this from him? Why had this boy been hidden, raised without the knowledge of his blood? But his questions tangled with guilt, with the sharp edge of truth he couldn't run from. He had never searched hard enough. He had let the past close like a wound and moved on, thinking it had healed. But it hadn't. It had only festered in silence, and now the scar stared back at him with eyes too much like his own. The boy tilted his head slightly, cautious but curious. "Who is he?" he asked in a soft Apache accent, his words halting, careful, like he hadn't used English often. The grandmother's hand tightened on her blanket. Her answer was delayed, her lips pressed into a thin line, but finally she said, "He is, a man your mother once knew." Jesse flinched. Just a man, was that all he was allowed to be now? The boy frowned, not satisfied with the answer. He took a tentative step forward, wooden horse dangling loosely from his fingers. Jess's heart hammered louder. Every instinct screamed at him to kneel, to reach for his son, to gather him into his arms and claim him before all the world. But fear rooted him in place. What if the boy recoiled? What if he rejected him? He had no right, no claim. Years had already been stolen, and what could Jesse offer now besides more confusion? The boy's eyes lingered on Jesse, searching, as if he too felt a pull he couldn't name. His gaze finally dropped to Jess's hands, calloused and rough from ranch work. Slowly, almost shyly, the boy lifted his own small hand and compared it in the air, his little palm facing Jess's. The size difference was vast, but Jesse saw it, saw the same shape, the same lines in miniature. It undid him. Jesse sank to one knee, unable to stand tall under the weight of it all. His voice cracked when he whispered, "Son." The grandmother stiffened, her eyes flashing warning, but Jesse barely noticed. The boy blinked, confusion in his face, but something softer too, something Jesse dared to hope was recognition, even if he didn't understand why. The air was thick between them, heavy with all that had been left unsaid for too long. The camp seemed to fade, the murmurs of the people distant, the heat of the sun forgotten. It was only him and the boy now, a gulf of years and silence yawning between them, but bridged by blood, by truth. Jesse reached out, hand trembling as it hovered in the space between them. He didn't touch, not yet. He let the boy decide. For a long, unbearable moment, the child hesitated. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his eyes darting from Jess's hand to his face, as if measuring whether this stranger was danger or safety. And then, slowly, the boy placed his little hand into Jess's. The contact was light, almost unsure, but to Jesse it was thunder. His throat closed, his eyes burned with tears he hadn't shed in years. He curled his fingers gently around that fragile hand, terrified that if he gripped too hard the boy would vanish, that the whole moment would dissolve like a mirage. The grandmother shifted, her breath catching, but she didn't intervene. Perhaps even she understood something sacred was unfolding. Jesse swallowed hard. His voice broke when he said, "I didn't know, son. I swear I didn't know." The boy studied him, puzzled, not yet grasping the weight of Jess's words. But his hand stayed in Jess's, not pulling away, not recoiling. That was enough, it was everything. Memories flooded Jesse, unbidden and sharp. The nights with the boy's mother, their whispered promises, her laughter soft in the dark. The morning she disappeared, leaving him with nothing but the echo of her name. He had cursed fate, cursed himself, but he hadn't chased her, hadn't fought for what they had. He told himself it was impossible, that their worlds were too different. And because of that choice, his son had grown up without him. Guilt cut deep, but beneath it was a vow forming, hard as iron. He would not lose another day. He would not stand aside, silent and absent, while his boy grew into a man without ever knowing his father. But he also knew the truth, it wasn't only his choice. This boy had a life here, ties, roots in this place and with these people. Jesse couldn't rip him away, not without causing pain. The boy's trust, his place, his heart, all of it would have to be earned. Jesse's gaze lifted to the grandmother. Her expression was unreadable, a storm of grief and anger and resignation. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice raw. Her chin lifted slightly. "My daughter chose silence. She thought it safer. For him, for you, safer." Jesse wanted to rage at the word. Was it safer for the boy to grow up fatherless? Was it safer for Jesse to be robbed of knowing his son? But he bit back the anger. It would do no good here. Instead, he nodded, slow, heavy. "Then I'll respect that, but no more lies. He deserves to know." The grandmother hesitated, her eyes softening for the first time. Perhaps she saw the truth in him, the sincerity in his breaking heart. After a long silence, she inclined her head, just once. The boy looked between them, sensing the weight of what passed though he didn't yet understand. His small fingers tightened around Jesse's, and Jesse felt it like a lifeline. In that moment, Jesse knew his life had shifted forever. He had ridden into this camp expecting suspicion, maybe hostility. Instead, he had found his son, flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood. The years lost could never be reclaimed, but the years ahead stretched wide open. He wasn't going to waste them. With the desert sun casting long shadows across the camp, Jesse drew in a breath, steady and full. His voice was quiet but sure when he whispered, "You're not alone anymore, son." "Not while I breathe." The boy's eyes, those piercing blue eyes, locked on his, and for the first time, Jesse thought he saw a flicker of understanding. A fragile seed planted, and it was enough.